When loneliness meets deception in the digital age, the consequences can be devastating. Michael Thompson thought he'd found a second chance at love through a screen. The person behind Sarah Mills believed their carefully crafted female persona would never be discovered. But when fantasy collides with reality, sometimes more than just hearts get broken. This is the story of how a year-long online relationship built on lies ended in a moment of violence that destroyed two lives forever. Chapter 1. The Widower's Search. Michael Thompson never anticipated spending his 64th year alone. 3 years had passed since Margaret succumbed to pancreatic cancer after a brief but devastating battle that left him financially drained and emotionally hollow. Their 37-year marriage had been the foundation of his adult life, and without her steady presence, even the most basic daily routines felt foreign and purposeless. The suburban Cleveland home they had shared now seemed designed for echoes rather than conversation. Rooms that once buzzed with activity fell silent, except for the persistent hum of appliances and the occasional creak of settling wood. Michael found himself talking to their old dog, Charlie, just to hear a voice in the house, even if it was his own. Their adult children maintained dutiful contact through weekly phone calls and holiday visits, but their lives had naturally expanded beyond the orbit of their childhood home. Michael understood this progression and felt no resentment, though the understanding did little to alleviate the profound quiet that had settled over his days. Retirement had arrived 2 years before Margaret's diagnosis, promising decades of shared experiences and leisure time they had spent decades planning. Travel brochures still sat in kitchen drawers alongside restaurant coupons they would never use together. The future they had mapped out had dissolved, leaving Michael adrift in a present he had never prepared for. Television became his primary companion, cycling through news programs, classic movies, and cooking shows that reminded him he was eating frozen dinners and cereal with increasing frequency. The house felt too large for one person, yet downsizing seemed like admitting defeat in a battle he wasn't ready to concede. Social media entered his life through necessity rather than curiosity. Facebook allowed him to view photos of grandchildren who lived states away, providing glimpses into family milestones he could no longer attend regularly. YouTube offered endless content that could fill the dangerous quiet hours when loneliness felt most acute. Instagram discovered him rather than the reverse. The algorithm began suggesting content based on his viewing patterns, introducing him to a world of vibrant young people documenting their daily experiences with enthusiasm he had forgotten existed. These glimpses into other lives provided both comfort and painful contrast to his own increasingly isolated existence. Sarah Mills appeared in his feed during one of these late-night scrolling sessions. Her content differed from the polished perfection typical of social media influencers. She shared cooking failures alongside successes, posted makeup-free morning photos, and wrote captions that suggested genuine struggle rather than manufactured relatability. Her authenticity felt refreshing in a digital landscape, often criticized for superficiality. Michael began anticipating her posts with an intensity that surprised him. Her smile seemed directed personally at him through the screen, and her occasional struggles with finances or loneliness resonated with his own challenges. She represented vitality and hope in a life that had grown increasingly static. The first interaction required significant courage. Sarah had posted a photo of homemade cookies with a caption questioning whether the indulgence was worthwhile. Michael's response was carefully crafted to sound supportive without being inappropriate. Her prompt reply, with genuine appreciation, sparked something that had been dormant since Margaret's death. The exchange was brief and seemingly insignificant, yet it represented the first positive interaction Michael had experienced with an attractive woman in years. The simple acknowledgement of his existence by someone young and vibrant felt like validation that he remained visible in a world that increasingly overlooked older men. That initial comment opened a pathway Michael hadn't realized he was seeking, leading toward a connection that would ultimately consume his remaining savings, his emotional stability, and his moral compass. Chapter 2. The Perfect Illusion. Alex Rivera stacked boxes in a Phoenix warehouse while dreaming of a life beyond minimum wage and mounting debt. At 21, he had already dropped out of community college twice, leaving him with student loans he couldn't repay and few prospects for advancement. His studio apartment reflected his financial reality: a mattress on the floor, a folding table, and a laptop held together with electrical tape. The American dream felt increasingly like a mirage in the desert heat. The warehouse night shift provided plenty of time for his mind to wander during those endless hours of scanning barcodes and loading trucks. Alex often scrolled through social media during breaks, watching influencers showcase lifestyles that seemed impossibly luxurious compared to his own. The stark contrast between their manicured lives and his paycheck-to-paycheck existence felt like looking through a window into another world. The inspiration struck during a particularly brutal shift when a co-worker casually mentioned how easily attractive women could monetize male attention online. Men would send money to pretty faces without hesitation, he claimed, especially if those faces belonged to women who seemed attainable rather than untouchable. The comment lodged in Alex's mind like a splinter, growing more persistent as his financial situation worsened. Alex possessed naturally soft features that had often been remarked upon throughout his life. His jawline lacked sharp angles, his eyelashes were naturally long and dark, and his bone structure could be described as delicate rather than masculine. With the right makeup techniques and strategic photography, transformation seemed possible. Creating Sarah Mills required extensive research and preparation. Alex studied successful female social media accounts with academic precision, analyzing everything from pose angles to caption styles. He watched countless makeup tutorials, learning contouring techniques that could feminize his facial structure. His final paycheck from the warehouse went toward a decent camera, basic cosmetics, and secondhand women's clothing. The first attempts at transformation were clumsy and obvious, but Alex persevered with the determination of someone facing eviction. Gradually, through trial and error, Sarah Mills began to emerge. The person staring back from his phone camera bore little resemblance to Alex Rivera. Sarah appeared naturally beautiful, approachable, and undeniably feminine. Building Sarah's online presence required careful construction of an entire fictional identity. Alex crafted her as an aspiring artist working multiple jobs to survive, someone relatable yet inspiring. Her posts balanced vulnerability with optimism, sharing struggles that felt authentic while maintaining an aspirational quality that attracted followers. Each caption, photo, and interaction required careful consideration to maintain consistency. The response exceeded every expectation. Followers accumulated rapidly, drawn to Sarah's apparent authenticity in a digital landscape often criticized for superficiality. Comments poured in expressing admiration and interest. The validation felt intoxicating, even though Alex knew it was directed at someone who didn't exist. Financial support began modestly with small gifts and donations, but grew steadily as emotional connections deepened. Men began viewing Sarah as more than entertainment. She became someone they cared about, worried over, and wanted to help. Alex found himself trapped between desperate financial need and growing guilt over the deception. Maintaining the illusion became increasingly complex. Sarah needed consistent personality traits, believable explanations for avoiding video calls, and carefully modulated voice patterns for the occasional phone conversation. Each lie required additional lies to maintain credibility. What had begun as a temporary solution to a financial crisis had evolved into an elaborate, ongoing deception with no clear exit strategy. Chapter 3: Falling Deeper. The relationship between Michael and Sarah evolved with the gradual intensity of a slow-burning fuse. What began as occasional comments on posts transformed into direct messages, then daily exchanges that became the highlight of Michael's otherwise predictable routine. Sarah's responses felt genuine and personal, addressing him by name and referencing details from previous conversations that suggested she actually remembered their interactions. Michael found himself checking his phone compulsively, refreshing Instagram and his message notifications with the anticipation of a man half his age. Sarah's messages arrived at different times throughout the day, creating a rhythm that gave structure to his otherwise formless retirement. Good morning texts, accompanied by photos of her coffee cup, became as essential to his daily routine as his blood pressure medication. The conversations deepened beyond surface-level pleasantries. Sarah shared what appeared to be genuine struggles: difficulty making rent on her small apartment, challenges balancing multiple part-time jobs while pursuing her artistic ambitions, and the loneliness of being single in a city where authentic connections felt increasingly rare. Her vulnerability felt real and unmanufactured, drawing protective instincts from Michael that had been dormant since Margaret's illness. Behind the screen, Alex Rivera experienced a complex mixture of guilt and financial relief as the relationship intensified. Each message from Michael required careful crafting to maintain Sarah's established personality, while avoiding details that could expose the deception. The emotional labor was exhausting, yet the financial rewards continued, growing in ways that made his warehouse job seem increasingly unnecessary. Michael's first financial gesture appeared spontaneous and small. Sarah had mentioned struggling to afford groceries after an unexpected car repair, and Michael offered to send a modest gift card to help. The gesture felt natural rather than transactional, motivated by genuine concern rather than expectation of reward. Sarah's grateful response, complete with photos of the healthy meal she could now afford, reinforced Michael's belief that his help was making a meaningful difference in someone's life. The financial assistance escalated gradually over the following months. Sarah never directly requested money, but she shared enough details about her struggles that Michael could identify opportunities to help. An overdue utility bill, textbook expenses for the art classes she claimed to be taking, and medical bills from a minor emergency room visit for what she described as severe food poisoning. Each contribution felt justified and reasonable in isolation, but collectively they represented a significant portion of Michael's monthly income. His savings account, which had taken decades to accumulate, began shrinking at an alarming rate. Yet Michael felt more alive and purposeful than he had since Margaret's death. Someone needed him again, depended on him, appreciated his presence in their life. Alex struggled with increasing internal conflict as the amounts grew larger. Michael's kindness felt genuine, and his emotional investment in Sarah's well-being created a weight of responsibility that kept Alex awake during the few hours between his warehouse shifts and his Sarah Mills obligations. The persona that had begun as a financial necessity was becoming a prison of escalating lies and emotional manipulation. The relationship reached a critical threshold when Sarah began expressing a desire for a deeper connection. She mentioned feeling isolated and wished she had someone to talk to during difficult moments. Michael, emboldened by months of positive interaction, suggested they arrange a phone call. The prospect terrified Alex, while simultaneously representing the natural progression of their relationship that Sarah's character would logically desire. Chapter 4. The Moment of Truth. After 8 months of digital courtship, the inevitable conversation about meeting in person could no longer be avoided. Michael had grown increasingly bold in expressing his desire for physical proximity, while Sarah had become expertly evasive about scheduling conflicts and travel complications. The delicate balance Alex had maintained between encouraging Michael's emotional investment while avoiding face-to-face contact was beginning to collapse under the weight of mounting expectations. Michael's persistence intensified following a particularly emotional exchange where Sarah had confided about feeling overwhelmed by financial pressures and loneliness. His offer to visit Phoenix and help her through a difficult period felt both generous and natural after months of intimate conversation. The proposal terrified Alex, while simultaneously representing the logical next step that Sarah's character would welcome from someone she claimed to care about deeply. The arrangements were made with Michael's characteristic thoroughness. He booked a modest hotel room near Sarah's claimed neighborhood, researched local restaurant for their first dinner together, and even purchased a small piece of jewelry as a gift to commemorate their meeting. His excitement was palpable through his messages, describing his anticipation and nervousness about finally holding her hand after months of digital affection. Alex experienced escalating panic as the meeting date approached. The months of deception had created a fictional person with detailed history, personality traits, and emotional connections that couldn't be sustained in person. Every aspect of Sarah's identity would crumble under direct scrutiny, from her physical appearance to her voice patterns and mannerisms that existed only through carefully curated content. The weight of the financial obligation added another layer of complexity to the situation. Michael had sent over $30,000 during their relationship, money that Alex had spent on rent, debt payments, and basic survival. The expectation of romantic reciprocity for such generous financial support created pressure that extended far beyond simple emotional manipulation into territory that felt increasingly dangerous. Sleep became impossible during the final weeks before Michael's planned arrival. Alex found himself caught between the desperate need to confess the truth and the terrifying prospect of facing Michael's reaction to such extensive deception. The kind, gentle man who had shared intimate details about his grief and loneliness would discover that his emotional sanctuary had been constructed entirely from lies. The confession came through a phone call 3 days before Michael's scheduled departure for Phoenix. Alex's voice cracked with genuine emotion as he attempted to explain the reality behind Sarah Mills. The words tumbled out incoherently, mixing apologies with explanations about financial desperation and the gradual escalation of a deception that had spiraled beyond his control. Michael's response was initially silence, then disbelief, then a cold rage that Alex had never heard in his gentle voice during their previous conversations. The man who had shared poetry and expressed gratitude for bringing joy into his lonely life transformed into someone whose anger felt dangerous even through the phone connection. The call ended with Michael's promise that he would still be coming to Phoenix, but not for the reunion they had planned. His tone suggested intentions that extended far beyond seeking closure or demanding financial restitution. Alex realized with growing horror that the web of lies he had constructed might have created something far more dangerous than simple heartbreak. Michael was coming to Phoenix with expectations that could no longer be met and rage that had been building for months without release. Chapter 5: When Fantasy Shatters. Michael arrived in Phoenix on a Tuesday evening, 3 days after the phone call that had shattered his understanding of reality. The flight from Cleveland had been turbulent, matching the storm of emotions that had consumed him since learning that Sarah Mills existed only in pixels and lies. His carry-on bag contained the jewelry he had purchased for their romantic reunion, now feeling like evidence of his profound gullibility. The drive from the airport to Alex's apartment complex took 43 minutes through desert streets lined with palm trees and strip malls. Michael had memorized the route during sleepless nights spent planning this confrontation. The address had been easy to obtain once he knew Alex's real name, discovered through reverse searches of the phone number used for their devastating final conversation. Alex had spent the 3 days since his confession in a state of paralyzed terror. He had considered fleeing Phoenix entirely, but his financial situation made relocation impossible. The money Michael had sent over 8 months had covered basic survival rather than creating any emergency fund for situations like this. His studio apartment felt like a trap with thin walls and a single exit. The neighborhood was quiet when Michael's rental car pulled into the parking lot shortly after 10 in the evening. Alex watched from his window as the older man sat motionless in the driver's seat for several minutes, gathering courage or perhaps rehearsing what he intended to say. The sight of Michael in person, looking smaller and more fragile than his imagination had suggested, triggered a fresh wave of guilt that had been building since the confession. Michael's knock on the door was soft but persistent. Alex hesitated before answering, knowing that opening the door would make this confrontation unavoidably real. When he finally turned the handle, he came face to face with the man whose loneliness and kindness he had exploited for financial survival. The physical disparity between them was immediately apparent. Michael appeared older than his 64 years, grief and recent betrayal having carved additional lines into his weathered face. Alex looked younger than 21, his naturally soft features now seeming vulnerable rather than feminine. The contrast highlighted the fundamental inequality that had defined their relationship from the beginning. Michael entered the apartment without invitation, his eyes scanning the sparse furnishings and evidence of poverty that had motivated the deception. The space confirmed Alex's claims about financial desperation while simultaneously making the extent of his manipulation more comprehensible. This was the environment that had produced Sarah Mills, born from necessity rather than malice. The conversation that followed was brief and explosive. Michael's rage, suppressed during 3 days of travel and planning, erupted with the force of months of accumulated betrayal. Alex's attempts at explanation and apology only intensified the fury of a man who had invested his remaining capacity for love in an illusion. The violence, when it came, was swift and final. Michael had not planned to become a killer, but the sight of Alex's face, so different from Sarah's filtered photographs, yet wearing the same expression of vulnerability that had drawn his affection, triggered something primal and irreversible. The confrontation ended with Alex motionless on the apartment floor and Michael staring at his hands in disbelief at what they had done. Chapter 6: Unraveling the Web. The discovery of Alex Rivera's body came 18 hours after Michael had fled Phoenix. A neighbor in the adjacent apartment had heard what sounded like furniture being overturned, followed by an extended period of unusual silence from a unit that typically played music or television throughout the evening hours. When Alex failed to appear for his warehouse shift the following night, a coworker contacted the apartment management to request a welfare check. Police found the front door unlocked and Alex's body in the small living area. The scene suggested a brief but violent confrontation between two people of significantly different physical capabilities. There were no signs of forced entry, indicating Alex had willingly admitted his attacker. The sparse apartment contained few clues about the victim's life, though investigators immediately noticed the professional camera equipment and women's clothing that seemed inconsistent with Alex's masculine appearance. The breakthrough in identifying a suspect came through digital forensics rather than traditional detective work. Alex's laptop and smartphone contained extensive evidence of the Sarah Mills deception, including thousands of messages exchanged with multiple men over several months. The conversation thread with Michael Thompson stood out due to its volume, emotional intensity, and most critically, the documented financial transactions that had motivated the elaborate fraud. Bank records revealed the staggering scope of the deception. Michael had transferred $37,000 to accounts associated with Alex Rivera over 8 months, amounts that represented a significant portion of his retirement savings. The final messages between the two men, including Michael's threats following Alex's confession, provided investigators with a clear motive and a timeline for the confrontation. Phoenix police contacted their Cleveland counterparts to locate Michael at his suburban home. Officers found him in his backyard, sitting motionless in a lawn chair and staring at nothing in particular. He offered no resistance to arrest and made no attempts to deny his involvement in Alex's death. His confession was detailed and matter-of-fact, delivered with the emotional detachment of someone who had mentally separated himself from his actions. The legal proceedings moved swiftly through the system. Michael's attorney advised a plea bargain rather than a trial, recognizing that the evidence was overwhelming and a jury would likely show little sympathy for his client's claims of emotional manipulation. The prosecution was equally eager to avoid a lengthy trial that might generate sympathy for a grieving widower who had been exploited by an elaborate fraud. The case attracted minimal media attention, relegated to brief mentions in local news reports that focused on the online deception angle rather than the underlying tragedy of two desperate people whose lives had intersected with devastating consequences. Neither Alex's estranged family nor Michael's adult children granted interviews or made public statements about the case. Michael ultimately accepted a plea agreement that resulted in a 15-year sentence for voluntary manslaughter. The reduced charge reflected his lack of premeditation and the circumstances that had provoked the fatal confrontation. At his sentencing hearing, He expressed remorse for taking a life while maintaining that Alex's deception had destroyed his faith in human connection. The financial aspects of the case were never fully resolved. The money Michael had sent to Alex had been spent on basic living expenses rather than luxury items, leaving nothing to recover through civil proceedings. Chapter 7. Lessons from the Digital Age. The tragedy that claimed Alex Rivera's life and destroyed Michael Thompson's future represents a convergence of modern vulnerabilities that mental health professionals and criminologists are only beginning to understand. Digital relationships create unique psychological dynamics that can amplify existing emotional instabilities and generate dangerous illusions of intimacy between strangers who have never shared physical space. Dr. Patricia Henning, a forensic psychologist who has studied similar cases, explains that prolonged online deception creates what she terms emotional debt in victims. When someone invests months or years of genuine feeling in a fabricated relationship, the psychological injury from discovery often exceeds simple financial loss. The victim experiences a form of identity crisis, questioning their judgment and capacity to form authentic connections. Michael's case demonstrates how grief and isolation can create particular vulnerability to manipulation. Widowed individuals over 60 represent a growing demographic targeted by online predators precisely because their emotional needs often outweigh their digital literacy. The combination of financial resources, social isolation, and desperate longing for connection creates an almost irresistible target for those willing to exploit such vulnerabilities. The psychology behind Alex's deception reveals equally troubling patterns. Financial desperation, combined with the anonymity of digital platforms, can gradually erode moral boundaries that would normally prevent such elaborate fraud. What begins as a temporary solution to immediate problems can evolve into complex psychological entrapment, where the perpetrator becomes as psychologically dependent on the deception as their victim. Romance fraud has become one of the fastest-growing categories of cybercrime, with victims losing an estimated $1.3 billion annually, according to Federal Trade Commission data. The majority of these crimes never result in arrests, much less violent confrontations, but the emotional damage to victims is consistently severe regardless of financial recovery. Mental health professionals identify several warning signs that might have prevented this tragedy. Requests for money, regardless of stated emergency circumstances, represent the clearest red flag in any online relationship. Reluctance to meet in person or speak via video chat after extended communication should trigger immediate suspicion. Most critically, the intensity of emotional connection that develops faster than would be natural in face-to-face relationships often indicates manufactured intimacy designed for manipulation. The case also highlights the dangerous intersection between shame and rage that can occur when vulnerable individuals discover they have been systematically deceived. Men of Michael's generation often struggle to process feelings of humiliation in healthy ways, particularly when those feelings involve perceived threats to their masculinity or competence. Experts recommend several protective strategies for individuals seeking connection through digital platforms. Video communication should be established early in any serious online relationship. Financial assistance should never be provided to someone met exclusively online, regardless of claimed emergencies. Most importantly, trusted friends or family members should be informed about significant online relationships to provide an external perspective on potentially manipulative dynamics. The proliferation of deepfake technology and increasingly sophisticated photo editing tools will likely make these deceptions more convincing and harder to detect in the coming years. Society must develop better educational resources and support systems for individuals whose isolation makes them vulnerable to exploitation. This tragedy serves as a stark reminder that behind every online profile exists a real human being whose capacity for both suffering and inflicting harm should never be underestimated in our increasingly digital world. What do you think could have prevented this tragedy? Was Michael a victim of manipulation, or was his response inexcusable? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more deep dives into the dark psychology behind digital deception. We'll see you in the next case.